Good morning. I'm Bill Poteat, staff writer with the Gaston Gazette, and we are continuing our series called Gaston Talks, where we chat with leaders from the community and the area about things of interest. And today we are talking with three folks from the Catawba Lands Conservancy. We have the executive director, Tom Okel. We have Bret Baronak, who is the community coordinator and also works with the Carolina Thread Trail. And we have Allie Schwartz, who is the marketing and communications director for the agencies. Guys, thank you for being with us this morning. Appreciate it very much. Let me ask, and I know some of the answers, but I'm going to ask for the benefit of our readers and watchers. Tell me a little bit about the history and the purpose of the Lands Conservancy, and whoever feels most qualified to do that, go ahead.
Sure. Our organization is about 26 years old, and it was really started as a very grassroots organization by some folks that lived on Mountain Island Lake. And at that time, Mountain Island Lake was looking at some development for the first time, and this group of people began a public discussion about how this development was going to impact the water quality of the basin, which supplies water for all of Mecklenburg County and much of Gaston County, as well as the wildlife habitat. And through that, they worked with Mecklenburg County, and that led to the establishment of Cowan's Ford Nature Preserve, which is still about 800 acres that's been so critical to preserving Mountain Island Lake. And from that effort, they realized that there was a lot of similar work that could be done as our region was growing, so they incorporated it as a land trust. And so we work in 6 counties in the lower Catawba River Basin, from Iredell over to Lincoln, Gaston, Catawba, Mecklenburg, and Union counties, and we preserved about 16,000 acres in 26 years, focused on land that impacts our water quality, wildlife habitat. We work with local farmers, and then we obviously work to connect people to nature, and that's a big part of the Carolina Thread Trail, which is probably our biggest, most strategic ongoing project.
Now, Tom, when you say that you have conserved 16,000 acres, do you mean that you have purchased 16,000 acres, or that you have worked out agreements as to how this land will be used?
It generally means that that land will never be developed,
right? That
it will be in its natural state, and that can either be through a conservation easement, where it's still owned by private individuals, but they've conveyed to us the development rights, or land that we own. About a third of the property we actually own in fee, and 2/3 of it is through conservation easements.
You used a word there, forever. This land is preserved forever. As population grows, as demand for residential area grows, as pressure grows, how can you ensure that forever? I mean, obviously, if you own the land, it's forever. But is the land that you have the easements on also forever?
Yes, it is a permanent it's a part of the deed. And
right.
The development rights have been conveyed and extinguished, and we're responsible for that in perpetuity.
So even if the land changes hands, that does not change?
Correct. We come with it. So.
Right. I'm bouncing around a little bit here, and again, anyone can respond. People think about wildlife, and they think about, the waterfowl and the animals that live, but they don't think that much about habitat. And these folks have to have a place to nest, they have to have a place to feed, they have to have a place to raise their young. How important is the preservation of wildlife habitat?
It's extremely important, and that's a great question. It's a big part of what we're doing, because part of the great sort of growth and prosperity story of our region has just been an expanding urban core, and we've seen how that breaks up the natural corridors for our wildlife to move around. And so our big focus is to have areas that are critical mass for wildlife to be able to to live and to move around. And so as opposed to trying to have small properties scattered all over our region, we really focus on about 14 specific areas where we can get critical mass of hundreds or thousands of acres.
So it's important to have contiguous areas so that the wildlife can move, so
Absolutely.
that they can live naturally. Okay.
And one of the really neat things in Gaston County, which is we have more property preserved in Gaston County than any other county. Of our 16,000 acres, about 5,000 of that is in Gaston County, which is important because of the waterways that come through with the South Fork of the Catawba and the Catawba. But we have some very large conservation areas that are separate, but they're connected through power line easements. And so it creates, in totality, a very large wildlife habitat, and that's been critical.
Well, now, I had mentioned to you, and I've forgotten the name of the trail, the section of the trail that begins in McAdenville and goes up to Lowell.
Yeah, the South Fork Trail.
South Fork Trail. Having seen an eagle over there, what are some other types of wildlife that folks will encounter on that trail and the other trails along the easements that they might not expect to see or think, wow, I just saw an eagle?
Well, certainly there's, and I'm no wildlife expert, but there's a variety of birds that you can see, birds of prey, obviously, with eagles and falcons. Obviously, deer are along the trail. Of course, you see deer just about anywhere.
You'll see fox,
beaver, fox. What else is out there?
Heron, egrets.
Oh yeah, heron and egrets.
And a lot of, if you're a botanist, a lot of rare plant life. And there's some properties that we have protected in Gaston County that have some rare plant species that are really important to protect. We have one of the largest populations of big leaf magnolias, which is a rare and beautiful plant, magnolia tree, here in Gaston County. Red Layer, which is about 1,200 acres, has the largest population of big leaf magnolias in the eastern part of the U.S.
Where do you all get your funding to either purchase or get the easements for these pieces of property?
We get our funding from probably three broad areas. One is just people that care about this region and the heritage of our region, what's going to be left after we're all gone. So we have members that support our organization, as any not-for-profit does. Most projects we do have some element of donative intent, where there's a landowner that cares about this land being maintained in its natural state in perpetuity, as you said. And then there are public funding sources, and probably the biggest and the one that's been used most here in Gaston County is the Clean Water Management Trust Fund, which is a state North Carolina government run trust fund that's designed to protect water quality and water quantity. So when we're working to conserve land that impacts water quality, which was, as I said, was really the very founding principle of the organization, we're able to go apply to that trust fund for funding to purchase easements or land from people.
Mm-hmm. The Catawba and the South Fork are, as you said, the water supply for most of Gaston, Mecklenburg, Iredell. And you may not be able to answer this question, but I'm just wondering, looking at projected growth, how long will we have enough water?
That's a great question, and luckily there are a lot of people that have been focused on that. There's an organization called the Catawba Water Management Crew that includes all the 18 municipalities that are along the Catawba River, and depending on which variables you use in the model, at some point in the next 50 to 100 years, the Catawba won't be able to supply the demands we're putting on it, because it's really a sort of a circuitous exercise, because with more people, there's more development, there's more impervious surface. So at the same time that there are more people putting demands on the river, there's more flash and more silt that's reducing the capacity of the river. So if you depending on the variables you use, at some point the Catawba will not be able to sustain the number of people that we have. But what we're doing, and we still have a great opportunity going all the way up to the headwaters in McDowell County, protecting these riparian buffers will push that date out.
Yeah. I noticed yesterday during the rain, and it wasn't all that much rain. We had flooding here in Gaston.
It takes very little.
It's just because of all the concrete and asphalt.
Exactly. Stormwater runoff becomes a big issue with development.
Yeah.
But luckily, the county and in Mecklenburg County, they do a great job of managing it, but it doesn't get any easier the more we grow and the more concrete.
Right. Well, I wanted to ask about a couple of specific tracts that you all had recently conserved. The 125 acres in East Lincoln County. Tell us a little bit about that area.
I think you're probably talking about what we call the Koli Preserve,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a farm that we were able to purchase through a bargain sale from Bondi Koli, and this was a family farm that her husband used really as a spot for recreation, and it was a spot that meant a lot to him. And he passed away in an accident, and which was very tragic, but as a way to sort of memorialize the place that he cared about so much and leave it in its natural state forever, she worked with us to preserve it. So, and going back to what I was saying earlier about focus areas, that's part of what we call our River Bend Conservation Area. So that's an area in Lincoln County that impacts Gaston County, because every drop of water that comes through Gaston County comes through Lincoln County. We've been able to put together properties that total over 1,000 acres. It's about 7 miles on both sides of the river there, so that has a huge impact on water quality as the river comes through Lincoln into Gaston.
And you noted that the water coming to Lincoln comes from Catawba, and the water coming from Catawba comes from Burke, and the water from Burke comes from McDowell. So you have to work up and down the whole basin.
And it's conservation that knows no sort of political or geographic boundaries. It's something we have to all work together on.
Okay. Bret, let's talk a little bit about the Thread Trail.
Sure.
And the Carolina Thread Trail eventually will be how many miles if everything comes together?
Well, in our 15 county footprint, all of the planned miles totals up to almost 1,600. It's 1,590 miles.
Wow. And you're up over 250 now?
Yeah, we got 260 plus right now.
How does that tie in with the idea of conserving land along the river and conserving it, but also making it accessible?
Well, and I think that it goes back to the question you asked about some of the wildlife that you might see in these properties. So the origins of the trail were really about, we have a lot of these beautiful preserved places, but how do people get in there and see them and appreciate them?
Right.
So that was the advent and the origins of the Carolina Thread Trail. People get in there, they can use the trail, appreciate nature, spread the word about how nice these places are, and it really encourages momentum for more and more of this kind of work to be done to preserve our natural spaces. So trails are very, they're a low impact facility. You're not cutting down a lot of trees for trails, those kinds of things. So it really strikes a balance of being able to get people to appreciate natural spaces, but also is consistent with the goals of preserving the environment. So it doesn't create lots of runoff and those kinds of things.
Are there areas that even a trail would be invasive that need to be kept just as they are?
I think, there may be some topographical constraints. You may have some places where it's just not physically possible to build a trail that's sustainable. Right. So, of course, in your trail planning, your trail construction, you stay away from those. But for the most part, as you think about the different types of surfaces of trails, we have everything from paved down to natural surface. And natural surface, I believe, can probably be located in the majority of natural spaces without having any kind of real impact. But, again, going back to topography, you may have some steep steep gullies, valleys, inclines, and those kinds of things. And you would want to keep your trail away from there because it could create some erosion problems. But for the most part, trails are low impact, and they can be located in a lot of these places.
How much do you work with municipalities and other counties and planning boards and other agencies in helping to develop this network?
Well, on the job that I'm assigned at the Thread Trail, that's the large majority of the work that I do. As a coordinator, it's all about working with what we call our partners, and those are our municipalities, our counties. I think we have 88 total, something like that. And my job is to walk them through and partner with them and take all the steps necessary to take this idea of a trail and make it into reality. And with the planning background that I have, that's everything from layout, best locations, the planning effort to determine where the most advantageous locations are for trails, procuring funding, and then just getting all the right people to the table to make a trail happen, because it takes more than just me. It takes more than just me and one staff member or community. It takes a whole realm of people. So getting the right people to the table is really the recipe to success, and having those champions in the community.
Talk a little bit, if you would, about the Kings Mountain Gateway Trail and how that's kind of a showplace for what folks working together can do.
Well, and like you and I have spoken before back in the summer, that's a really good example of having a local trail champion in the community who puts all their blood, sweat, and tears into making a trail happen.
Yeah.
Combine that with the county planning director, who is very supportive of trails, and then the Carolina Thread Trail coming in as a catalyst to help make things happen through funding, through planning. And that's really just a prime example of a partnership has bred a lot of success. Kings Mountain Gateway Trail now is up to over 5 miles. It's well utilized. It's personally one of my favorite trails in the region because I love the surface type and the width. And I was just on the phone with Shirley yesterday talking about some things we want to work on out there. So they have the advantage of having such a great local trail champion. And there's hopefully in the next year, maybe 2 years, that trail's going to extend another couple of miles and take you the whole way out to Crowder's Mountain State Park at Boulder's Access. So that goes back to the whole idea of connectivity. Downtown Kings Mountain, cross over Interstate 85. They have a bridge that they're able to utilize, which is great. Not everybody has that possibility. And then get you up to a state park. So connectivity.
It's a beautiful treasure, and people don't realize that you don't have to drive 3 hours to have a beautiful hike on a trail.
Well, that was going to be my next question. How soon can we expect the trail to be extended to boulders, and are there any particular obstacles in the way
the work
of that?
that's being done right now, and they have funding through the Thread Trail to buy trail easements where necessary. And so the work that's being done right now, which is looking favorable, is just working with individual property owners who are willing to grant a trail easement on their property to get out there. And that's usually one of the more challenging components of getting a trail done.
Yeah.
If you have the luxury of having a lot of land in public ownership, it makes it a lot easier. But as the years go by and we've kind of taken care of that low-hanging fruit, now you're working a lot more with private owners. And you have to be respectful, philosophical, private property rights, all those kinds of things.
Right.
So it becomes challenging, but you work on it, you roll up your sleeves, and I know right now things are looking favorable. And what a great trail that'll be. I mean, to have 7 miles connected to well over 16 miles of hiking trail, what an asset that is. And, kind of thinking about visitation, the longer the trail is, the more people use it, not only locally, but now you start talking about people coming in from a wide-ranging area, spending money in the community, economic development, and that's something that resonates a lot with elected officials.
Other than completion of that part of the Gateway Trail, are there any other sections of the Thread Trail that we can look forward to coming in Gaston County or in the next, say, 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, one of our priority corridors here in Gaston County is the South Fork Corridor, which we touched on briefly. So the idea of we're working hard right now to go from Cramerton the whole way up to Spencer Mountain eventually. That's about a 9-mile corridor that, we have 2.5 miles on the ground now from McAdenville up into Lowell. There's a greenway that's going to be built in Cramerton. It'll bring you up under Wilkinson Boulevard. We're working on the connection between the end of that trail and into McAdenville. And there's some properties where it looks favorable to get up to Poston Park. The county just recently built a new pathway up there that we can connect into. So that corridor is very favorable, one of our priorities. Excuse me. And then Gaston County, or Gastonia, is working on, the Highland Rail Trail in the north neighborhoods, just real close to here, coming through town, and then eventually, we have a corridor that would take you from south out of Gastonia to get the whole way down to Daniel Stowe Botanical Gardens.
Wow.
That's another corridor that we're giving a lot of attention to. There's going to be some challenges there, no doubt. I mean, there's some property owners, there's some highways that need to be traversed, so that's all going to be challenging. But there's that one. The town of Mount Holly is doing great work right now along the Catawba River from Mountain Island Dam the whole way south of town, eventually working towards Belmont. Belmont themselves are working on a rail trail project that hopefully happens in the next year or two that will take you from the college into downtown. And Mount Holly's very active. There's actually dirt flying out there right now as we speak to get these trails in. So Tuckasegee Park up to downtown, and then downtown to Mountain Island Lake.
So there's stuff going on.
Yeah, Gaston County, I mean, we talked a lot about the activity with the land conservation, but trails, this is one of the more active counties for trails as well. In Cleveland County, thinking about Kings Mountain.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on this side of the river for sure.
And one of the things Bret touched on is every bit of the trail plan, it's all locally determined. We as an organization didn't come and say, here's where the trail's going to be. There was a 5 to 10 year exercise of working with every neighborhood and every community. And so you can talk about Gaston County, and even for our region, it's unprecedented to have a project of this size. Nothing like it's ever happened before, where 88 governmental jurisdictions have all together said, we all want to do this, we all want to work together. So in terms of a sort of regional coordination, it really is unprecedented. And to get back to your first question, there is no doubt that over the last 10 years, there's nothing that's driven the preservation of more natural space in this region than the Carolina Thread Trail. Because with the existing 260 miles, there's over 100,000 acres of natural space. It may not all be legally, permanently preserved, but it's natural space that's going to be there and be available for the public to enjoy.
And that's an important point, because this is all about being respectful to local decision making. We didn't come in and tell the locals what their master plans were going to be. They told us it's grassroots, it's bottoms up. Now, we're just in a very advantageous position now where, fortunately, trails are very much being recognized by all the communities as something that heightens the quality of life. So it's something they want to do. So it makes our job, I wouldn't say easier, but it makes for great coordination. They want to do trails, we want to do trails, we work together, and it's resulted in a lot of success lately. And I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Good. Allie, I'm going to ask you, how do you get the word out about all these wonderful things going on?
Everything from social media to media releases like I sent you, how we connected. We have our members are kind of they are advocates in themselves. They go out and they spread the word about why they support us and why their friends should support us, especially with the Thread Trail. We've got some membership groups that is really their aim, is to bring in more people, have them spread the word, just wearing your t-shirt around spreads the word about us, all of that.
Well, I noticed the nice jacket you have on there with the
Honorary Trail Master.
There's definitely a pattern where when trail segments are established, the local community takes ownership and pride in it, and it grows from there. And then people want to know, when will there be more? When are we going to be connected to the next segment?
Do folks ever get impatient saying, we want this done?
Yeah, we're impatient.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good problem to have. I mean, when people are demanding more and more miles of trails, that it's certainly resonating in the community. So I wish we could build it fast enough, but it's extremely popular, and they want more and more trail.
I'm going to ask a question here because we have a millennial amongst us. and then we've got two old guys.
Sorry about that millennial thing.
Who is more interested now in trails and trail development? Older folks like us or the millennials?
I have an answer to that, at least in my opinion. I think it's
Go ahead.
both. I really think that's the easy answer.
But for different reasons.
Yeah. I think that with millennials, they like to see that certainly recreation is very embedded in millennials. Transportation modes is very embedded in them. They want to try to find ways to get places without having to use their car.
Yeah.
I would think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, maybe with the older generation, I think they see more of a... What? You're not too bad. I see the older generation appreciates trails for that that whole natural environment thing and being out and maybe the therapy of being out in the woods and respecting nature and those kinds of things. But you may have a whole different answer to that. That's my experience.
Would be exact by nature. I think millennials, obviously outdoor recreation, and there's a phenomenon in Charlotte that I never would have guessed, where there's thousands of millennials that are working in Charlotte that don't have cars, and they're using public transportation and they're biking and using the thread trail and other greenways to get around. So that's huge in terms of just how people want to live today.
Yeah.
But I would agree with older generations, just having a place to go and enjoy a quiet walk in the woods is very valuable.
Two final questions. Number one, if folks are interested and want to get involved or want to help financially, how do they do that?
There are many ways to get involved, and you can visit our webpage, which is carolinathreadtrail.org, and on there you can learn about where the trail is. There's a great interactive map that's very mobile friendly, and you can learn segments that you can go on and experience the trail. You can learn about our volunteer events, our community events that we host, as well as how you can donate and help us financially.
And we have a new program coordinator that just started in January. We got a grant from the Winds Impact Fund. So we have a lot of public programming if people just want to get outside on the trail, on a preserve. We take people out for hiking, bike trips, kayaking, and it's all free and open to the public. There's a nature education portion of it as well. So that's a really cool way for people to get involved with us physically as well as volunteering.
We'll be having several public programs a week as we go through the spring. And Allie touched on one thing we haven't mentioned. Is part of the thread trail is actually Blue Way, where we go create, put in, and take out points along our region's rivers. So along the South Fork and the Rocky River and the First Broad River, we have areas where families can go enjoy. And there's no better way to see some of the natural space in our region than going down our rivers.
Now, do you have supporting memberships of the Conservancy?
Yes.
Okay. And folks could go to your website
Absolutely.
and find out more about that. Final question. All three or one of you can respond. Are you optimistic about the future of managing growth and conserving necessary space and keeping our waters clean and functional?
I'm very optimistic. It's something that everybody cares about, and people understand how critical it is to the future of our area. And we all want our area to grow. The areas that grow are going to be the areas that can attract talent, and areas that have a sustainable supply of fresh water. So I think people get the importance of what we do. Now, what comes with us living in such a great area is tremendous growth, and so it is a challenge, and there's a sense of urgency for us to keep up with the rate of growth. So it certainly creates challenges, but I'm optimistic.
You made me think of something, and this can be for what it's worth. Were you pleased or disappointed that Amazon chose not to bring its massive influx to this region?
Personally, I would say I was indifferent. It would be a huge benefit for us, but I know that 50,000 people weren't going to bring water with them. Yeah. And so we need to figure that out before we take such big incremental jumps in growth.
Well, that wraps up this session of Gaston Talks. I want to thank Bret and Tom and Allie for being with us this morning. Again, we'll have the website information for folks who want to get in touch with you. They can do that. And we really appreciate y'all being here.
Thank you for having us.